Well, I finally read the latest Mr. Freeze arc. I know I'm a bit late, it came out in 2019. I'm always kinda hesitant to read modern comics. They seem so confusing. I don't really know what's going on with modern Batman. You have all this weird stuff. I mean, what even is this? But this story seemed like just a good old-fashioned Batman vs. Mr. Freeze story. So I've wanted to read it ever since it came out. This is the kind of stuff I want more of, instead of all these bizarre events. What even is a Joker War, and what the hell's a Dark Knight's Medal? Anyway, this story seems to go by several names. I've seen it called both Cold Dark World and Cold Vengeance. But I'm just gonna call it Mr. and Mrs. Freeze, as that's a much better title anyway. Do keep in mind that I will spoil the entire story, so if you haven't read it but plan to, read it first and then watch this video. So in the story, Mr. Freeze is hard at work trying to cure his wife Nora. What else is new? Well, he's actually coming close to achieving it now. Mr. Freeze has been given some kind of serum by Lex Luthor, a serum that is said to bring Nora back. Why Luthor is some kind of floating ghost, I have no idea. See what I mean about modern comics? They're weird as shit. Anyway, thing is, Freeze doesn't trust Luthor, and why would he? So he's been testing the serum on other subjects first. He started with dead animals, then moved on to recently deceased humans, plucking them from morgues and such. The serum had the same effect on all of the subjects. It brought them back to life, but with severe side effects, like irreversible cellular damage. Freeze, growing more desperate, has now moved on to live humans. He wants to mimic Nora's state as close as possible, so he's had his men kidnap women of similar age and physique, and has had them cryogenically frozen. That will make them suitable test subjects. By the way, I love how cold Freeze has gotten. He's willing to do anything to bring back Nora at this point. He's been at it for years after all. He also casually kills one of his own henchmen in a very gruesome fashion after he failed a mission. It makes sense that he'd be this cold-hearted by now. Not only has he been trying to save Nora for years, but he's also been trapped in his icy state for years. Anyway, right as Freeze is about to begin his test runs, Batman bursts onto the scene, naturally. And yeah, he came well prepared too, complete with a fire bat suit and a freaking flamethrower. Yeah, it does look a bit toyetic. It reminds me of all those silly Batman action figures they used to make in the 90s. But I like it anyway, and it also makes sense. After fighting Mr. Freeze for so many years, it would be pretty stupid if he just showed up in a pair of tights armed with a couple of batarangs. Naturally, he'd prepare for the situation by now. That's the thing I really like about this comic. It's two veterans being at it, and it shows. It mimics real life, where we've gotten countless Batman vs. Mr. Freeze stories over the decades across all kinds of media. Anyway, Freeze is forced to flee the scene with Nora and abandon his test subjects. Once safely away from the Bat, Freeze decides to just take a gamble and give Nora the serum. And it works. Yeah, Nora is back to life again. After all these years and attempts, Victor has his wife back again. She's not fully back to normal though, rather she's in a similar state to Victor and needs cold to survive. To cure both her and himself once and for all, Victor and Nora sets out on a crime spree, stealing the funds necessary for Victor's research. Yes, it's not just Mr. Freeze terrorizing Gotham now, it's Mr. and Mrs. Freeze. That's both really dumb and really awesome at the same time. Victor begins to grow worried though when it appears that Nora is enjoying their capers a little too much. In fact, Mrs. Freeze is showing a more vicious streak than Mr. Freeze ever did. He thus begins to theorize that Luthor's serum is behind it. The serum is corrupting Nora. Yeah, you really never should trust Lex Luthor. Anyway, once they have enough funds to start the research, Victor is ready to leave Gotham and quit. Quit being a supervillain. He's done after all. He has his wife back and the necessary funds to make them normal humans again. There's just one problem. Nora doesn't care about none of that. She doesn't want to settle down with Victor and live a normal life. She wants to continue being a supervillain. On her own. Yeah, Nora dumps Mr. Freeze. Blasts him with an ice gun and just takes off. Wow. After all these years he's been trying to bring her back. It's been his entire shtick, cure his wife Nora. And now that he finally does it, she dumps him. That is fucking hilarious. Mr. Freeze is not the type to give up though. Theorizing that it's the serum that's making her like this, he teams up with Batman in a vain attempt to get her back. Batman naturally plans to have them both locked up after it's all said and done though, so at the last minute, Freeze betrays his new partner. He then tries to reason with Nora, and she responds with jamming a needle into his ear. Wow, this really is the greatest reunion ever, isn't it? The needle contained a serum that raises your body temperature, obviously fatal for Mr. Freeze. So the only way to save him is for Batman to put him somewhere cool. Somewhere real cool. He has him frozen in cryostasis. Mr. Freeze is now frozen in cryostasis, while Nora sets off on her supervillain career. The roles certainly have been reversed. The end. And that was the latest Mr. Freeze story. You know, I'm not really sure what to think of it. On one hand, I hate it. This is not how it should end between Victor and Nora. I would never have written something like this myself. I mean, it's just awful. It's like a kick in the balls. On the other hand, though, I kinda love it. Ever since the animated series, we've seen the same Mr. Freeze story told over and over again. It was a great reinvention of the character, but it did also severely limit his story potential. There's really only so much you can do with the whole Nora Fries story, and the comics have always failed at it anyway. They've desperately tried to recapture the magic that the animated series created, only to fail almost every time. So, why not just go nuts with it, like this story did? I mean, it certainly did something new, something we haven't seen before. Well, Nora was actually brought back once before, back in 2005. That time she was dipped in a Lazarus pit. This also caused her to turn evil. It was a very brief thing though, and made no real impact, and nobody really remembers it. It certainly wasn't like this. I mean, this is just... wow! I never wanted to see this. I never wanted to see Nora come back, only to reject Victor and become a villain herself. Never! Yet, I kinda enjoyed seeing it anyway. Something finally happened with Mr. Freeze. Something drastic. Something super ironic. When you think about it, this story is a masterpiece of irony. I'm pretty sure the writer Peter Tomasi was aware of that too. I'm pretty sure he knew what he was doing. I'm pretty sure he was tired of how stale of a character Freeze is too, and that's why he wrote this comic. Ever since the 90s, Freeze has just been going through the motions. Well, not anymore, I guess. It's the Mr. Freeze story we never wanted, but the one we so desperately needed. I mean, it sure is a spectacle to behold. Tomasi seems to like shaking things up with the rogues, like he did a few issues later with Two-Face when he turned him into a cult leader. Here's a few additional things I want to mention about the story. It's revealed that Victor froze Nora against her wishes. She still had a slight chance of fighting her illness and wanted to continue that fight, but Victor was too afraid to take that chance and thus put her in cryostasis without her consent. In fact, him making her decisions for her, controlling her as it were, is a big theme for Nora in this story. She resents him for it, and that also plays into her decision to leave him. She's tired of dancing to his tune. How much of this is really true and how much of it is just the serum talking, we don't really know though. Freezing Nora against her wishes certainly does spoil Victor's tragic backstory a bit though, which I'm not a fan of. However, it's nowhere near as bad as Freeze's New 52 origin by Scott Snyder. There it was revealed that Victor never even knew Nora and was just an obsessed stalker. So at least this comic undoes that origin, and at a very small price too. All this one did was show that their marriage wasn't quite as perfect as we've been led to believe. That's certainly a lot less horrible. Finally, I want to mention one scene that really bugged me. Shortly after Nora is brought back to life, Victor takes her to a theater where she goes up on stage and does a ballet dance. She used to be a ballet dancer after all. As they leave the place, we see that Freeze killed the entire audience with his freeze gun. He froze an entire theater full of people. Why? There was no reason for that. It seems unnecessarily evil of him. It contradicts how he's portrayed in the rest of the story. I mean, it's made pretty clear he doesn't enjoy killing. He just does it when it needs to be done or when he's disappointed. Being a supervillain was never fun for him after all. Crime wasn't about money and killing, it was just about curing Nora and himself. So this scene really sticks out and doesn't fit him. And it doesn't fit Nora either, as she doesn't seem to mind at all that her husband killed all those people. And this is supposed to be before Luthor's serum really kicks in, so she shouldn't be this evil. Yeah, this scene is just not good and doesn't make any sense. So there it is, my opinion on the latest big Mr. Freeze arc. Do I love it? Do I hate it? I have no idea. I guess you could say I'm of two minds on the subject. What do you make of it? Is it the best, most inventive Mr. Freeze story in ages? Or is it a pile of trash? Let me know down in the comments. And as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.